I used to believe my husband's death was an accident. I cried for 3 weeks, no food, no sleep, and organized a funeral that he himself had planned. Until one day, the director of the crematorium called me and said, "Ma'am, there was no body in the casket, only a letter." From that moment on, I knew I was no longer the victim. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't weep for the return of a man who betrayed me. I would make him experience exactly what I went through, but in a way he never saw coming. You're not just hearing a story about betrayal. You're about to witness how a woman learned to strike back with intelligence, with silence, and with the full weight of the law. Chapter 1: The Origin of the Wound. I still remember the feeling when I stepped into the house after an exhausting 18-hour shift at the hospital. Drained and weary, yet my mind focused on just one thing: holding my 2 kids in my arms and listening to them tell me about their day. But instead of smiles, I saw little Lucas sitting on the living room floor, clutching a garbage bag filled with his belongings, his eyes swollen from crying. He said just one sentence that I still can't forget. Mom, Grandma, and Grandpa said we don't deserve the nice rooms anymore. Our room is in the basement now. I hadn't even processed what was happening when Maya, my daughter, appeared from the hallway. She was dragging a pillowcase stuffed with clothes and her old violin case. Her eyes were red, not just from crying, but from anger. She was only 8 years old at the time, and yet in her eyes burned a sense of injustice. I knelt beside Lucas, still in my nurse's uniform, the smell of antiseptic from the hospital clinging to me. For 18 hours, I had saved lives, calmed patients, and held an entire medical team together through chaos. And yet now, in my own home, I felt so helpless, I could barely breathe. I asked them, trying to keep my voice calm. What happened? Maya gently set down her violin case and began to explain. After dinner, Uncle Ryan and Aunt Natalie came over. They brought baby Oliver. He cried a lot, so Grandma said he needed a quiet room for his afternoon naps. Aunt Natalie said she also needed a quiet space to focus on important work. Lucas nodded. Grandpa said we should be grateful we still have a place to sleep and that the basement is enough. I reminded him about my asthma, but he said I was being dramatic. I swallowed hard. The basement, damp, dark, windowless, crawling with spiders. That place wasn't fit for any child, especially not Lucas, who needed clean, stable air to breathe properly. I asked them, "Where are Grandma and Grandpa now?" Maya answered in the kitchen with Uncle and Aunt talking about repainting a room for Oliver. Grandma even said she'd buy one of those luxury baby rockers, the kind that costs a whole month's rent. I stood up. In that moment, the mother in me rose up stronger than any knowledge of medicine, stronger than the forced gratitude I had clung to during the 18 months we had lived under my parents' roof after the divorce. My 2 children, kind, intelligent, never complaining, were being treated like strangers, like burdens. I headed toward the kitchen, but before I got there, Lucas tugged at my sleeve and asked a question that broke my heart. "Mom, are we not real family, like baby Oliver is?" I looked into his eyes trying to make sense of why love could come with conditions. I replied, "You are my family. Always. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." But deep down, I knew the truth. We were no longer seen as family in this house. We were guests. Temporary, expected to be grateful, and absolutely forbidden from making demands. That night, I let the kids sleep with me like it was a slumber party. Maya hugged her favorite stuffed bunny, while Lucas brought his little flashlight in case of nightmares. Before drifting off, Maya turned and asked Mom, "Why do Grandma and Grandpa love Oliver more than us?" I stroked her hair and answered through a tightening throat. Sometimes grown-ups are so afraid of upsetting others that they end up choosing the wrong things to care about. But I promise, I won't let this keep happening. And that night, while my 2 children slept soundly in my arms, I pulled out my phone, logged into the bank app, and looked at the money I'd quietly saved over the past 18 months. Nearly $4,000, not enough for a perfect fresh start, but enough to plant the seed of a new life. A life where my kids wouldn't have to come second to another child just because of some paper-thin bloodline, a life where they would be loved properly. I started searching rental homes, tenant rights, when living with relative schools in areas I could afford. And for the first time in months of fear and forced gratitude, I felt a flicker of hope. A small light, but just enough for me to believe I can rebuild from here for myself and for my 2 children. Chapter 2. Faking Peace, Feigning Grace. I once thought that nothing could be more painful than divorce, but I was wrong. Living in a relative's house where each day felt like walking on eggshells just to be respectful was far worse. I began counting down every morning. Mornings when I woke up earlier than usual, not because of a hospital shift, but just to avoid having breakfast with the person who once called me the pride of the family. Now they averted their eyes from me, as if my presence was a living reminder of failure. One morning while I was packing the kids' lunch, I overheard my mother on the phone in the living room. Her voice was low, but every word sliced through me like a blade. Yeah, she's still here, but they won't be much longer. She's looking for a place, must be fed up by now. She's a nurse, probably has enough to rent somewhere cheap. That one word shattered me. I was she. I, the one who once cared for my father during his stroke. I, the one who held my mother through the night when my younger brother passed away. Now I was just, an inconvenience that needed to be moved out. That night I sat beside my sleeping children, hollow inside. But then a message from an old friend lit up my screen. Mercy Hospital is hiring night shift nurses. Higher pay, flexible hours. You should try. It felt like a lifeline. A chance to escape the suffocating shell called family obligation. I applied that very night. 2 days later, I got the interview schedule. An opportunity. Even if it meant sleepless nights, even if it drained me twice as much, I would do it, as long as it meant saving enough to get my children out of this house. But then something happened, as if the universe wanted to test whether I had the strength to truly leave. One Friday night, after a 12-hour shift, I came home to find Maya sitting outside on the lawn. Her knees scraped, her eyes red from crying. I rushed over. "What happened, sweetheart?" She said nothing, just silently handed me a piece of torn paper, her art class drawing. It was a colorful painting of our family, me, Maya, Lucas, and an imaginary dog she always dreamed of having, but the picture had been ripped in half. Later, I learned that baby Oliver, while crawling around, had torn the drawing, but instead of apologizing, Aunt Natalie blamed Maya for not keeping her things in a safe place. And my mother, she laughed and said, "It's just a drawing, no need to cry like someone hit you." No one protected my child. No one paused to understand that. For a little girl trying to regain her sense of safety after her parents' divorce, that drawing wasn't just art, it was her whole world. I held Maya tight, and something inside me snapped. No more hesitation, no more delays. I wrote a request to take on longer night shifts, negotiated for more hours, and every day I brought my tired body home, but also brought with me a small paper bag with a few more saved dollars. I hid it at the bottom of the cabinet behind the first aid kit where no one would look. I named that bag Freedom. Chapter 3. Old Flames, New Truths. I ran into Daniel during a night shift. He was an anesthesiologist, not movie star handsome, but the way he patiently listened to patients' stories and never dismissed anyone's pain made me feel a strange kind of safety. We had once studied medicine together. Back then, Daniel liked me. He even wrote me handwritten letters. But I was already head over heels in love with Michael, my ex-husband, and Daniel, he smiled, wished me happiness, and disappeared like a gentle, fleeting chapter in my life. Yet years later, in a hospital hallway filled with antiseptic and the steady beep of monitors, he reappeared, quieter, more mature. We started talking during our breaks, sharing lunchboxes and lukewarm coffee. He didn't bring up the past. I didn't tell him much, but sometimes in Daniel's eyes I saw something that had never quite faded. One day, after learning that I'd been working overtime nonstop just to afford a place of our own, he gently placed a hand on my shoulder and said, Sandra, if you ever need help, just say the word. Not because of anything else, just because you were once kind to me. I didn't say anything, but that night when I opened the lunchbox he sent me, I cried. It was seaweed soup, the kind my mother used to make, a dish I once mentioned to Daniel in our first year of med school. He remembered. While my own flesh and blood treated me like a burden, a man with no ties to me remembered the smallest details of my memory. Still, I kept my distance. I wasn't ready. But just as I began to believe in kindness again, Michael, my long-gone ex-husband, suddenly re-entered my life. Not with a phone call, not with a visit, but with a bank statement. That day, while setting up a transfer to place a deposit on a rental home, the bank officer told me our joint account, one that should have been closed after the divorce, was still active and had recent transactions. I looked at the recipient's name, Rebecca Miles. It didn't take much imagination to know who that was, Michael's former assistant. 10 years younger than me, once appeared at his company's Christmas party in a skin-tight red dress, laughing just a little too loudly. I'd once asked him about Rebecca. He laughed and said, "You jealous, she's way too young and clueless, not my type at all." Now I knew his type was naivety and easy control. I quietly printed out the statement, slid it into a file folder, and from that moment on, I was no longer the sorrowful ex-wife. I became the evidence gatherer. Every invoice, every transaction, every trace he left behind in a world he thought was sealed tight. And I swore this time I won't be the woman left behind. So Chapter 4. The dead can't come back, but I can. I returned to the bank the next day, this time with a soft smile on my lips and the idea of a legal spouse. As a joint account holder from the past, I requested a more detailed transaction history. The bank staff didn't question it after all. To them, I was just another middle-aged woman sorting through financial matters after a divorce. They had no idea I was on the hunt. What I found was worse than expected. Michael hadn't just been sending money to Rebecca. He had opened a new account under the name of his deceased mother, a ghost account, used to launder money, to keep it hidden. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. Michael had never truly left. He was still here living a brand new life under a false name with a fake identity, and stolen money from the ruins of our marriage. Here's the thing. Legally, I could still trace everything. Our asset division had never been finalized because Michael disappeared just before the court hearing. Everything had been put on hold. Now, I was about to unfreeze it. I went to Michael's former law office, a place he once believed was untouchable. I pretended to file a request to retrieve our old divorce documents, said I needed them for financial closure. In truth, I was there to extract information. The attorney, a quiet man in his 60s, who once seemed to hold Michael in high regard, looked at me strangely. Maybe because I was no longer the subdued woman trailing behind her husband. I asked him, "Do you know where my ex-husband disappeared to? Everyone says he's dead, but the bank says otherwise." He froze, and in his eyes I saw something close to shame. "Sandra, I don't know for sure. But yes, just before the divorce, Michael withdrew all his personal records from the system. It was highly unusual." "Unusual, but not illegal, right?" I asked, smiling. "Correct. But if you have proof he's still alive, then it's a whole different story." I simply nodded. That night, I didn't go home. I sat in my car parked a block away from a narrow alley in the suburbs, the same place Michael once took me to scout real estate investments last year. I waited, like a detective. Soon I saw headlights, a silver SUV license plate half covered, but the man behind the wheel. I recognized instantly. It was him. Michael stepped out, walked into a small house. Rebecca opened the door. They kissed like they were the real couple, like I had never existed. I didn't cry. Instead, I hit record. Because now I didn't need sorrow. I needed evidence. And now, I had it. Chapter 5. From a name on paper to a force they couldn't ignore. The next morning, I made myself a cup of coffee. Not because I needed the caffeine, but because for the first time in months, I truly felt awake. In my hand were three things: a video of Michael and Rebecca walking into that house, hands all over each other; a printed bank statement showing transactions under the name Dorothy Patterson, his mother, who had passed away; a list of assets under his name before he disappeared. I started step by step. Step 1. I was courteous. I sent an email to the insurance company where Michael had purchased his life policy. Naturally, I attached the death certificate, the one he forged himself, and requested to proceed with the payout process. I knew they would investigate. I also knew they had the means: GPS data, financial tracking, behavioral analytics, to confirm signs of life. I didn't want the money. I just wanted them to start asking questions. Step 2. I was honest. I called the local police department and requested an appointment to report a case of identity fraud and inheritance theft. I didn't name names, not yet. I simply said, "My husband is presumed dead, but I just saw him living with another woman in a house left to us by my late mother-in-law." The officer didn't say much, but I heard the pen scratching down every detail. Step 3, I was concerned. I visited the electricity, water, and internet providers for the house Michael and Rebecca were staying in. As the sole legal heir, I requested to have all services transferred to my name and temporarily shut down in preparation for a full property renovation. The customer service rep asked me just one question. "Do they know the power is about to be cut, ma'am?" I smiled. "No, and I don't think they need to." Step 4. I protected the asset. I hired a private security firm to install surveillance cameras around the house. Michael and Rebecca had no idea, but from now on, every movement they made would be watched. I named the system Justice Net. Then one night I saw the first moment worth remembering. Michael stood outside the front door, pounding on the lock. It wouldn't budge. Rebecca stepped out confused. The light from her phone lit up her face, panic written all over it. They had no idea what was happening. No clue why the house they'd been squatting in suddenly felt like a stranger. But I knew, because every one of my moves was designed to bring me closer, to make them feel out of control, disoriented, and most importantly, small. No screaming, no vandalism, just precise pressure. A quiet slice here, a clean snip there, and let them collapse from the inside out. I was no longer the abandoned wife. I was the one pulling the strings. Chapter 6. The dead have no claim to property. When Michael tried to open the front door and failed, I didn't feel guilty. On the contrary, I felt peace, because he was the one who declared himself dead. He was the one who told the world Michael Patterson is no longer alive. So then, how can a dead man claim the right to live? Jean, I started with the paperwork. The very kind that used to give me headaches, the kind Michael always brushed off, saying, "Let me handle it." Now I was the one handling it, and I did it better than he ever imagined. I became the sole heir. I met with the family lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, with watery eyes and a trembling voice. I don't even know where to start. Michael's passing was so sudden. I didn't need to act much, because to the world, Michael was truly dead. The death certificate, the insurance records, the will he once signed, they all sided with me. The law doesn't care if he's alive when on paper he's dead. And just like that, I inherited the house left by his mother, the one he and Rebecca were currently living in. His secret investment accounts opened behind my back. Rental properties never mentioned in a single family financial meeting. Every shared asset, because I was the surviving spouse. I shut down every path forward for him. I sent the death certificate to the bank accounts, frozen immediately. His phone carrier number terminated. The credit card company cards deactivated, account holder deceased. The tax office status updated as deceased, with all files transferred to my name. I had my lawyer send a formal notice of estate claim, including assets that showed signs of unlawful occupation. I called the land registry office. I'd like to register a house for sale. Are the current occupants aware? They asked. I don't know who they are, I replied calmly. All I know is my husband is dead and this house belongs to me. I planted a for sale sign right in front of their door. I hired the best real estate agency in town. And one morning, Michael stepped onto the porch to find a massive red sign staring back at him. House for sale. Contact owner Mrs. Sandra Patterson. I turned on my phone's camera. Michael froze. Rebecca ran out, eyes wide with panic. They argued, fought, pointed at the sign, the window, at each other. They didn't know every second of this had been part of my plan. Then he called me. A week later, I was peeling an apple in the kitchen when the phone rang. An unknown number. I picked up. Sandra, please. It's me. Michael's voice. Shaky, desperate, and finally diminished. There's been a misunderstanding. The house. The accounts. Do you know anything? I replied gently. Sorry, who is this? My husband is dead. Silence. Then I began listing the surveillance cameras, the frozen bank accounts, the cut electricity and water, the legal notice for unlawful occupation, the house listed for sale, the affair evidence, the note he left in an empty urn of ashes. His voice trembled. And as I ended, I said, You have 48 hours to vacate my house. After that, I call the police. When I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done. No courtroom, no press, no screaming matches, just truth and the law, doing what they do best. The dead don't get to argue. Chapter 7. Me, the last one standing. They left in the middle of the night. At 2:17 a.m. through the security cameras, I saw the beam of headlights sweep across Dorothy's driveway. Rebecca was driving. Michael sat in the passenger seat, clutching a cardboard box, probably remnants of their so-called escape dream. They carried only a few torn bags, flimsy boxes, and haunted expressions. I sat in the living room, phone and handscreen split into 4 angles, capturing every movement. Without saying a word, I knew I had won. From the betrayed wife to queen of the game. I used to think I was weak. I used to believe that if Michael ever left, I'd fall apart. But over the last 4 months, I rebuilt myself brick by brick from the rubble he left behind. I learned how to read the law, to understand every clause on inheritance ownership and finance. I learned how to act naive when needed and sharp when it mattered. I learned how to make a man live like a ghost inside the very house he thought was paradise. I never called the police. I never made threats. I simply lived like a woman who knows what she's doing. When people saw me moving back into my mother-in-law's house, they said I was strong. No one knew that house had once been the secret hideout of my husband and his mistress. I renovated everything, repainted the walls, replaced every piece of furniture, planted a brand new garden. No trace of Michael or Rebecca remained. Only me living in his mother's house, like a victor. I turned that house into income. The first tenant was a teacher named Emily, young, independent, and admiring the way I'd survived such a brutal blow. Each month when she sent over the rent, I felt a strange kind of peace, not just because of the money, but because I knew the house he once thought was his paradise was now the very thing financing my independence. The townspeople whispered, but no one said I was wrong. She followed the legal process to the letter. She handled it like a real attorney, no drama, no mess, and still got them out quietly. They no longer looked at me with pity. Now they looked at me as a woman who was sharp, strategic, and not to be underestimated. And Michael, who is he now? A man who is legally dead. No name, no house, no bank account, no phone number, no legal standing, nothing. A ghost just like he wanted to be. But ghosts don't get to live like the living. Now he lives like a shadow. No name, no assets, no legal identity. A man who once believed he could escape with his mistress and his ex-wife's fortune was ultimately lured into a legal trap crafted by the very woman he underestimated. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to destroy. All I needed was a copy of his death certificate and a good memory. And in the end, I realized this I didn't need revenge to win. I just had to let him sink into the weight of his own scheme while I walked away, more radiant than ever. So if you've ever been dismissed, betrayed, or labeled as someone who can't fight back, remember this sometimes. Silence is the loudest roar.